So as you can tell, if you've been around, we're starting a new collection of sermons and talks today, and we'll do this over the next 4 or 5, 6 weeks, something like that. But before I get to what I have prepared and want to share with you, I want to tell our church family at home that I've been one of you for the last 9 weeks, as Elfie and I have joined in with our church family each weekend and have experienced and encountered what you have. So I would say to you at home, once all this craziness is done, there's nothing like being in person. I know in many ways this is the best that it can be right now, but we will get through this and then come back and experience the presence of one another. There's just nothing that compares to that. And so I want to encourage you, hang in there. We'll all get back together before too long. So if you're new to Copper Hills, you may not know this, but I took a sabbatical the last 2 months from June 1st till last weekend. Now, you may not know what a sabbatical is and what exactly do you do on a sabbatical, right? Do you just sit around and watch TV and eat bonbons, or what happens, right? Well, for me, I don't think there's one way to do it, but for me, it is taking off the responsibility that you understand we all have in life and just setting it aside for a time and not having a calendar, not having an appointment to get to, not having something to prepare for, not having the phone ring, just those kinds of things, right? And that leaves lots of white space on your pages. Where you used to look at all the words and not see the white space between the words, now you don't see the words. And you got lots of white space to think and to meditate and to have fun and relax and chill, and it's been so refreshing. I am so grateful to be part of a church family that thinks that's important for your pastors. Thank you for that gift to Elfie and myself. So practically, what do you do? Well, the first 3 weeks I was recovering from hip replacement surgery, and I'm a rock star, right? You can't even tell. There's no limp, there's nothing. I'm good to go. But I lay low for a while. And then I had this amazing trip with a friend of mine, an 8-day trip, 4 cities, 6 new churches that we're a part of, and we're helping and we're encouraging and where we can. And it was so fantastic to be in those settings with these young church planters that are at times discouraged and upset, at times upset and frustrated, because it's just not working the way they dreamt it would be. And then to be able to go, hey, 25 years ago, that was us. And we do understand what that's like. And so we've just come to pray with you. We've come to encourage you. We've come to where we can help you financially. But I want to share that story with you someday, to tell you the places that we're involved in as a church. We don't talk a lot about it, but what a wonderful experience it was to be there on the ground, seeing what God is doing. And then Elfie and I fit in a couple of weeks of vacation, kind of Central California coast, Morro Bay, where the daytime high was about 65. There is actually that temperature. It's there, yeah. And we enjoyed each other so much and our time there. And then we came back, and now it was time to turn my attention to thinking about what did we learn. Not only did we join in here via online, we visited 9 or 10 other churches. And I must have visited 30, 40, 50 churches online just to get a sense of what God's doing in this fantastic world of ours. And I've concluded once again, just been reinforced for me, the local church is the hope of this world. In all of its expressions, when it's centered on Jesus Christ, it turns out the local church is still the hope of this world that Jesus works through. And to see it is just so good to be encouraged in that way. So, speaking of that, I want to take a look the next 4, 5 weeks at what it means that we are the church. This is us. And what is us? What does that look like? Who are we? Now, I want to stop for just a second here before I go into the text and say, this isn't about vision. This isn't about a belief statement. It isn't about mission statements and things like that. If you want to get that information, come here on Wednesday the 18th from 7 to 9, and we'll share all of that, especially if you're new to Copper Hills or you're checking Copper Hills out. That's a great night to come. We call it Copper Hills 101. It's an informal talk together about those other elements. But what I want to focus on is this. What are the values that Jesus lived by? Because it turns out we're followers of his. And what he modeled and what he taught is what we are compelled to be a part of. But we need to think about what those are, lest we follow some other values, lest we follow the cultural norms, lest we give in to the pressure to be something or do something that he just wouldn't think is important. And so I need you to work with me for a few minutes. We're going to do some theology. You okay with that? A little bit of theology. Okay, so you can turn to Colossians chapter 1. We're going to read a section in there. But let me give you a little bit of background. If you've hung around the church for any length of time, you've probably heard the name Paul, right? He's written almost half of the New Testament, sometimes called Paul the Apostle or the Apostle Paul, which just meant that he was uniquely called by God to be the first of a whole bunch of people that shared the good news of who Jesus was with his culture. And he did that really well. The irony is that he was asked to do that, given he was such a strong antagonist to Jesus' cause in the days following Jesus' death and resurrection. But I guess anybody can be called if God says you can be called, right? If he thinks he can change your life and you relent and give in, I guess he can change us. He radically changes this man's life. And he goes on to start what looks like about 14 or so new churches over the course of his life. And then they started other churches, and then along the way, we got started. And that's our heritage. We go all the way back to that. Well, one of the churches that he didn't start, it was kind of a second-generation church because he never actually visited this city, was the city of Colossae. It was in southwest Turkey, as we would know it today, and it was a metropolitan city of the time. And somebody other than Paul, one of Paul's proteges, went there to start the church. Well, after a period of time, Paul gets a message back saying, hey, it looks like they've drifted a little bit. The original truth of what they embraced and held on to has gotten kind of thin. There's other ideas that are filtering in, and it's undermining, Paul, what you taught them about who Jesus is. And Paul was smart enough to know you get Jesus wrong, you get everything wrong. You just get it all wrong because he's a central part of it. And so Paul lovingly and graciously sits in his cell in Rome. That's right, in his cell in Rome, which is where he is because he believes this so profoundly. And he writes them a letter to encourage them and also to remind them of this critical truth of who Jesus is. We cannot ever get this wrong. We cannot water this down. We must stick true to this statement that Paul makes. And it's almost like he just riffs. He starts thinking about something, he just goes on. I want to read it with you. I'm going to read it right out of my text. Something happened to me in the last 9 weeks. My vision got lost, and I have to actually use glasses. No, I actually want to read it right out of the Bible. That's why. Usually I have it in my notes. So this is what it says in Colossians chapter 1, starting in verse 15. It says, the Son, that's Jesus, is the image of the invisible God. Stop for just a second. You ever wonder what God's like? Study Jesus. He is the exact image of God. So if you're lost and wondering, I wonder what God is like, is he this God of the Old Testament that seems so mean-spirited at times and so random, so violent? Well, hold on. That's not the whole picture. You want to see what he's really like? Spend your time thinking about and discovering who Jesus is. Goes on to say, he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. That means he's been forever. Even at the point where he became a human being, he had already been forever. He was part of the creation story, is what he's trying to say. So he knows all the way back to everything, beyond Jonah, beyond Moses, beyond Abraham, beyond Adam and Eve. He's there. He's been there forever. For in him, all things. Like, if you're circling in your Bible or highlighting, highlight the word all. Look how many times it shows up. In him, all things were created. Things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Now, some of you are going to walk away from tonight, you needed to hear that in itself. In a world that looks like it's coming apart and falling apart, it ain't, because somebody's got his hands on it. Somebody has some boundaries to this. Somebody's got his arms around it. It can only go so far before he steps in, and he's promised to step in. You needed to hear that. If your world is in chaos and you're afraid and frightened and don't know what's happening, and it looks like doom, it says right here that all things hold together by him. And he is the head of the body, the church. There's our statement. That's what we're going to look at. He's the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead. What does that mean? Well, that means he's from the beginning, but he's also the first person, first human being to be deity at the same time that he's human, and to be killed as a human and come back to life again. That hadn't happened before in this way, and it had huge significance. So he's the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he may have supremacy, preeminence. That doesn't just mean that he's first, that means he's over everything as well. He's first and he's over everything. This is who we follow. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, not part of it, all of it, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. That's how we have peace with God, and that's the only way. Here's the truth of us, all of us. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. Yep, me too. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you, get this, holy in his sight, without blemish. You thought you were wrecked. Without blemish and free from accusation. Nobody can accuse you. And then the condition to the whole statement. Here it is. That's all yours. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard, the good news of Jesus. And that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. That is the message that Paul gives to this young church. And I think if he was writing us a note, he'd recite that same thing. Don't lose Jesus. Don't drift from who he is. He's the answer. He's the one who holds it all together. He's the one that declares you perfect. He's the one that presents you to the Father. He's the one that takes the burdens of the things you've done on himself. Nobody can accuse you. You're made holy. So if that's who he is, let's follow him, right? Let's learn from him. Let's look at the way he lived his life and what he taught and the fruit that his life bore when he was here. The stories in the scriptures for us. And, we're going to look at 4 big rocks. These aren't the only values of Jesus. There are others, but these are kind of the big rocks. And we really want to follow him in these things and not just look at them and go away, boy, I hope somebody else does that. Nope. Because we're followers of who he is, we want to do these. So the first one we're going to talk about today is that we want to help each other move from just being friendly to befriending. I think these will come up, won't they? I'll give you the other 3 real quickly. We'll cover these in the weeks ahead. The second one is we want to help people move from attending to belonging. And then the third one is from observing to serving. And the last one, we want to move from rows to circles. But I want to look at that first one first of all. And here's what I want to start with. If you look at Jesus' life, one of the things that marked his life, it's so wonderful to think about, is this, that he comes to live among us. He comes to least likely people who aren't all cleaned up and sorted out and, admirable and heroic and living the good life, the moral life and faithful to God. That's not his story. His story is he comes for the least likely, and I think intentionally when he physically goes to people, when he's here in his 33 or so years of his life, the 3 years that we read most about, he's continually going to people who are least likely to go to be with them. Why? To correct them, right? To straighten them out, to tell them the moral way to live, how to believe, what to do, what to look like, how to act, right? Nope. He comes to be with them. He comes to be a friend of theirs. The most unlikely people, like really unlikely. There's one story where Jesus goes and is spending time with an army officer with the occupying Roman army in his country. Bend your mind around that. A country comes in and takes over the United States, right? Like, not going to happen, but think of it. And there's an occupying army, and now we're the subjugated people under them. They tell us what to do and where to go and what to be like, and if you get out of line, you go to jail or you lose your life. Like that kind of person. Jesus hears word that he's got a sick family member, and Jesus goes, oh, that'll serve him, right? No. He goes to him. I can just imagine the aghast look at him when he goes, we're going. And we're not just going to go, we're going to help. We're going to do something here. We're going to make a difference. Because I'll just bet, if I get involved in his life the way I plan on getting involved in his life, I think he's going to sit up and notice. I don't think you have your son brought back to life or healed and you just go about life like usual. No, Jesus goes and he's with them. Story after story of where he goes to be with poor people, which you have to understand in that time, to be poor was because God was upset with you. You had done something, you had misappropriated something, you'd been mean-spirited in some way, you'd rejected God, and God impoverished you. That was just the thinking. Now, we don't think that way. Well, sort of. We think we get poor because of our own mistakes, not God doing something to us. But that was the thought there. Same thing if you were sick. If you had some kind of a disease, it was because God was getting you. Well, what does Jesus do? Once again, he doesn't go to them to correct them, to admonish them, to tell them, you know something, the idea of you've done something wrong to God is actually right. This is what you should fix. No. He goes with them. He does life with them. He's together with them. He doesn't just wave to his neighbors and go, hey, good to see ya. He actually gets involved in their world and their lives. Why does he do that? So we'll do it because it's been done to us. He's come to us. Do you know we're not the most lovely people? You didn't know that? Yeah, we do. In our quiet times, we know who we are. We know what we've done. And he comes to us to be with us, to not just wave and go on by, but to actually be a friend. One of the stories we talk a lot about here is a story where Jesus and his buddies are headed from Jerusalem to their northern headquarters around the Sea of Galilee. And they take the most unlikely route. They take it through what would be considered enemy territory. It wasn't really a safe place to go because there were people that were ethnically different than them, religiously different than them. They had different values. And besides, they were at odds with each other. You never knew what was going to happen. It was like going to like the inner city hood or the ghetto. You don't know exactly maybe what's going to happen. Well, Jesus goes that way, and about noon, he sends the guys in to, get Jimmy John's subs or whatever they had at that point. And he stays at this well to get some water. He's going to wait till the guys get back, and lo and behold, a woman comes along. Now, if Jesus had had any level of propriety, he would have just said, hey, how you doing? Good to see you, and then ignored her, because that was the thing to do. But he doesn't do that. He engages her in a conversation, and through the course of the conversation, it comes to light that she is like relationally struggling in her life. She has lost some relational skills that are essential for relationships. She's gone through 5 marriages for some reason. And she's just decided to throw in the whole marriage towel. And she's living with the guy now, both of which were, in Jesus' world, would have been, that is so misguided. That's so dishonoring. Don't do that. That's not healthy. Don't do that. But it's happened to her. And through the course of the conversation, you see it unfold in John chapter 4. You can check it out. She's so moved by this experience that she, at some point at the end of it, though I kind of think, this isn't in the Bible, right? This is just Brad. I think there's more to the conversation than what the Bible records. I just think they talked some more. Because some of it doesn't flow in kind of a logical way. I wonder if that conversation didn't go on as long as it took for the guys to get to town, buy the subs, and come back. The town was half a mile away. It might have been an hour or more. I think there was more to the conversation. Whatever happened in that conversation, she does not feel condemned for her failings and faults. But if you read it and you find out what happens at the end, this is what happens. Let's put that up from John chapter 4. It says, many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did, and if you want to finish it, and he didn't condemn me for it. Next slide. And so when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. And this is what they said. They said to the woman, it's no longer because of what you said that we believe. It was initially, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. A simple conversation that's more than, hi, how are you? Hope you have a good day. But a conversation that starts with, I see you. I've noticed you're here at the well. And now I'm going to take interest in you. And this is what Jesus does repeatedly. There's another story of he visits a town, and he's walking into town, and there's a fan of his up in the tree, of all things. I guess the street was lined, and the guy's a little bit on the shorter side, a little height challenged. He climbs up in a tree to watch Jesus, and Jesus is walking through like he's a popular guy, right? There's lots going on. The press are there, the groupies are there, everybody's following him. And he stops the whole thing, looks up, and he knows the guy's name. How did he know his name? I don't know. Maybe he had friendship with him. Maybe he had met him before. Maybe somebody told him about it. Whatever it is, he stops the whole deal and says, hey, guess who's coming to lunch today? He does not look up and go, hey, Zacchaeus, have a great life, buddy. Hope things turn out for you. Nope. I'm going to go for lunch with you. I noticed you in the tree, and now I'm going to take interest in you. And that includes me going for lunch with you. It's so cool. At the end of it, at the end of that experience, Jesus walks away from it. And have you ever had one of those experiences where everything just goes right for you? Like you knock it out of the park, you make the sales presentation, or you seal the big deal, or something that you worked at for months and months suddenly comes together, and you walk away and you go, man, I was made for that. You ever had that? That's what Jesus does. After that encounter with Zacchaeus and his life changes, he walks away and you go, for this purpose I came into the world, to seek and to save. Guys like that. It's what I love to be able to do. Do you love doing that? Do you love taking interest and notice of people that you work with? Or are they just colleagues you work alongside? Some of you are starting college or high school, middle school, and you're in a classroom with new people, and you haven't met them before. Are you interested in them? Have you noticed them? Some of you play on a team or have a hobby that you do as a group. Are you just doing a hobby? Or are you interested in the people? Are you noticing them? The place where you live, is it just a home in the neighborhood that you got at the right price? It's got the really neat pool. It's close to the kids' school. Don't have to commute so far to work. It's great for you. I'm happy for you. One of the things that going on sabbatical does is it gives you, or at least it gave me, the opportunity to read some stuff. And I came across a book written by Rosario Butterfield. Unique name. She writes a book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. Interesting title, right? What does she mean by that? That means this, to her, that when you say yes to Jesus and you experience the wonder of being lost and then found, of being broken and then fixed, of being destitute and lost and then found and being given life, it comes with a house key to your house, and you give it to whoever wants it, because your home is no longer just the place you live. It's a place that God resides, and you use it as a place, as light and salt in your world. 25 years ago, Elfie and I and our 3 children decided to move to Phoenix to start a church. We didn't know anybody in the city. And so one of the things we had to do was to find a home that we could live in. Apparently you need that. And so we flew to the city. We didn't know exactly where we were going to start this church. We had been told that based on some demographic information and so on, that the northwest part of the city would be the best place, north of I-10 and west of I-17, which is still about like 2 million people, right? And so we got here in the middle of summer, like it was 112 degrees. We get to the airport and we go up to the car rental kiosk, and the guy says, "Hey, I see you got a car booked. I'll give you a free upgrade to a convertible if you want it." And we go, "Are you kidding me? Phoenix convertible? We're in." Everybody knew we weren't from around here. Yeah, like nobody else is driving in 110 degrees with the top down. Not happening. Budget still uses it in their training material for new recruits, right? Like, look, there's some really naive people that come around. So we're staying at this hotel. It's around 7th Street and Thunderbird. And we spend a couple of days looking to, like, God, where do you want us? We think you have a purpose here. It's not just random, stick a dart on a map, but you have a place for us. And more than that, you have a neighborhood for us to live in. And if you'll show us where that is, we commit to you that we're going to use that home as just a ministry base to love our community in your name, Jesus. That's what we're going to do with it. So the Sunday night before we left, we climbed up the top of Tapatio Cliffs, and we're holding hands together. And we're watching the sunset in the west over Peoria and Glendale. And we think that's where we have to be. That's probably where we'll be. And again, we just committed together, Jesus, our home. Would you put us in a neighborhood that we can love, wherever that is? A couple months later, we came to town, and now we're touring neighborhoods specifically to look where to live, and we feel drawn. Maybe it's just like, you know, the excessive Mexican food we had or whatever it is. There's this internal sense that we need to be in this particular neighborhood and this particular lot, 6447 West Adobe Drive. And so we go over to the sales office, and we find out what the model is, we find the cost, and so on, and we go, that's what we want. We want that one. And salesperson does a little bit of work, and she comes like, I'm so sorry. Just this afternoon, someone put an offer on that particular lot. Now, normally, I would get, oh, okay. Then, God, you're leading that way. We'll find something else. But I had something inside of me, and Alfie as well. I said, for some reason, that's the lot. And so we left the sales office, took our little car ride to 6447 West Adobe, and we embraced each other, and we said, God, we think here. We don't know that for sure. And if it doesn't end up being here, that's okay. But we just have a sense that here's where it's supposed to be, because you want to do something in this neighborhood. You want to bring yourself here. So we went back to the hotel, and next morning we had a call from the salesperson saying, you know how this ends, right? The family that was going to take it backed out of it, and it's yours if you want it. And so that's for 12 years, that was our home. Over those 12 years, we saw amazing things happen. For the first months, we decided we wanted to get I don't actually recommend this, but we did it. We wanted to get to know our neighbors. And so for the first 75 days of the next summer when we moved in, the first 75 days, 60 of them, we had a neighbor in our home. Alfie and I had this little code figured out. If I had invited them at 6 o'clock, it was for dinner. If I had invited them for 7, it was dessert. You don't want to get those mixed up. We did a couple of times. But we got to know our neighbors because we had committed that our home was going to be used for that purpose. Many of those neighbors are still friends of ours 25 years later. Some of them are part of this church family today. They serve and they lead, and that wasn't the purpose, but that's how it happened. We walked through marriages and births and divorce and disease and death. Because what we had said we would do, God honored. There are some people today who are raising kids in a home with Jesus at the center, because he did something in those relationships, and their family history is forever changed because of it. It is. There are some people who have given their lives, this isn't better or worse than anything, but they've given their full-time life to ministry and serving him on a full-time basis. It's phenomenal what we saw. Now, I am not telling you that because that gets an attaboy or anything. I'm confessing something to you. As I thought about this through our sabbatical, my sabbatical, I realized I've lost that. I don't use my home that way anymore. I don't think that way. I really don't know how much influence I have in my neighborhood. I don't know if they think of me, and then when they do, they think of Jesus. But that can't go on. That's changing. We are simply going to love our neighbors. We don't know what that looks like, but it's going to start here. It's going to start by taking notice and then taking interest in them. And they'll tell us what their needs are. They will tell us, but they won't tell us if we don't take notice. Because we think of our homes as private sanctuaries. When if you're a follower of Jesus, it's actually a community safe house, is what it is meant to be. That's why God gave it to you. Do you know why you have your job? Do you know why you play on the team or have the hobby you have? Do you know why you go to the school that you go to? It's only partly because of the obvious. It's mostly because of what Jesus wants to do through you. Rosario Butterfield, in her book, tells a little bit of her story, and I want to show you a couple of videos that tell her story. You see, sometimes the neighbors that live around us don't have our lifestyle. They don't have our morality. They don't have our faith. They don't look like us. They don't act like us. They don't speak like us sometimes. They have different political views than us, and they're more than happy to share them with us. And sometimes neighbors around us, people at work, friends at school, are just annoying. They are. Just like you and I must have been to Jesus, who came and rescued us and put something in us. So the story of Rosario is pretty self-explanatory. I'll fill something in after the first bit, but let's run the first part of this video.
I was raised in an Italian family. There were some issues in my house that made it almost impossible to have people in. So hospitality didn't really become endemic to my life until I had set up a home of my own. I was a professor at Syracuse. I lived as an out lesbian feminist in New York. In our LGBTQ community, somebody's home was open every night of the week. And there was never a question, where will I go if I need help? Because the community itself is organic and fluid, and that was how we dealt with crises. After I wrote my tenure book, I really wanted to write a book that was on my heart. Why is the religious right such a hateful community? And why do they hate people like me? I was on a war against two things, patriarchy and stupid. So I was really curious to know why relatively decent people would use the Bible in such a hateful way. So I wrote an editorial, and it brought all kinds of attention my way, which I didn't really expect. But one of the things it brought my way was a letter from Ken Smith. When Ken and his wife Floy invited me to dinner, I was happy. I thought of Ken as my unpaid research assistant. And they were fine with the fact that I wanted to read the Bible to critique it. That began a research journey that changed my life. But it wasn't research that changed my life.
So what was it that changed her life? If you read her story in her book, the video doesn't capture it, but she gets all these negative notes about her article, which really is critical of religious, conservative, right, whatever you want to call it. And she gets some affirming ones as well. But in the mix of all of what were largely mean-spirited criticism of her, there's one in there from a guy by the name of Ken, who expresses to her his disagreement with her thesis, with her idea. But he does it with gentleness, and he does it with kindness, and he does it with a sensitivity and a posture of mercy and grace. And so she's going through these negative kind of comments that she gets, and she remembers something that her writing professor had taught her in college. And it was this: never criticize your enemy till you read what they've written. And never criticize your enemy till you sat down and talked to them. And so she says, I better talk to one of my enemies. Well, I'm going to take this most pleasant of the negative. And so she calls Ken and says, hey, could we talk? I need to be faithful to what my prof taught me. And what does he do? He says, why don't you come for dinner? Just come on over to my home. Come for dinner. And so she does. In her book, she tells the story of sitting there in her red Isuzu pickup truck, regretting that she agreed to do this because she knows what awaits her behind that door. She's a feminist. She's an out LGBTQ woman. She's an activist. Like, it just doesn't fit. She's been told that over and over again, and so she sits there in her truck and finally musters up the courage, walks up to the door, knocks on the door, and Ken and his wife open the door. Take a look at this.
The way that they practiced hospitality became a living, breathing example of the theology that they were teaching. After my first dinner at Ken and Floyd's house, Ken gave me a big hug, Floyd gave me a big hug and a kiss on the cheek. We said, we'll catch up next week. This was fun. Can't wait to do it again. They did not share the gospel with me, and they did not invite me to church. And that was so wonderful, because what it showed to me was that they didn't see me as a project. They actually saw me as a neighbor. Now, I didn't step foot in the church for 2 years, but every week I was in their home. And every week it was clear that pretty much anything could go. We could ask anything. Ken and Floyd were fine. And that process of dialogue and table fellowship was compelling. It was deeply compelling. I did not come to faith because I stopped feeling like a lesbian. It's not that I got all of my worldview issues just completely cemented with a happy Christian evangelism, not at all. I came to faith because I became convicted that Jesus is who he says he is. We live at this time where so many Christian ideas are understood as hate speech. After the Obergefell decision legalized gay marriage, that put the gospel on a collision course with the new law of the land. And I think many Christians have been struggling with, well, how do I speak? What do I do? How do I move forward? Home is a vital place to invite your neighbors in, to have some heartfelt conversations. We can love our children together. We can let some things slide, even though the world we live in would say that we're supposed to be enemies. To me, hospitality is the ground zero of the Christian faith.
I don't know in my lifetime whether I have seen an opportunity more clearly and richer for us in a fragmented, disunified, broken world to love our communities more than this opportunity that we've been given. With the skepticism toward Christianity, with voices in the public media and online that are so loud and so brash and so uncaring and so discompassionate. We're all painted with that brush, you know that. And yet underneath it, we are people who ourselves have been rescued by the love of a good God who didn't seek first of all to condemn us, but sought first of all to die for us, to come to us, to take away the burden, the very thing that would keep us from experiencing God, And he came to us, unlikelies, and did what was necessary. He took notice. He took interest. This is who we follow. This is who we follow. And if we're going to follow, we need to rethink, what is my job? What is my classroom? What is the club I'm part of? What is my home? What do I use it for? For the fame of a good God with a good name who came to us. Amen.